Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Marcykate Connolly.
Hey there, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited to be chatting today.
Likewise.
Can you tell me about your books?
Yes. I write middle grade and young adult books, primarily fantasy. That's my main genre. They're usually a little bit creepy, especially the middle grades. That's kind of my genre is weird little books. That's what I like to say.
Nice.
So some of them are actually large books, but yeah, that's my weird little books. That's what I like to call them. I have a few of them out. My most recent ones was a Hollow Dolls series, which it was from Source Books. It was Hollow Dolls, and the duology finisher was Lost Island that came out in last fall. And that's about a girl who is a mind reader, and she was captive of this terrible woman for a long time, and now she's free and trying to find her home, which nobody has ever heard of. And she has this adventure trying to find her home, but she can read people's minds as well, which adds this extra layer of intrigue to what people are thinking and doing. And that was super fun to write. So like a little Lost Girl type story. I also write young adult books. Yeah, it was fun. I also write young adult books, and my first young adult duology, and only one so far, hopefully there'll be more, fingers crossed, is the Twin Dagger series. And that ended last summer with Heartless Heirs, the second book. And that was basically a fantasy spin on Romeo and Juliet, if Juliet was a magic-wielding spy set in the world of magic versus machines. And that was super fun to write. So
that is all awesome. So how did you get into writing your, as you put them, weird little books?
I kind of fell into it. I went to Hampshire College out in Western Massachusetts, where they don't give you grades. It's a magical place. I loved it.
That's incredible.
Fantastic. It was, especially as somebody who did not really thrive in high school. Like I did okay, but was not thriving. And then college was like this amazing experience. One of the things I had to do there was called a Division III project, basically kind of like a senior thesis essentially. And for that, I wrote an opera, and it was this big self-directed project, this year-long project. And I spent the whole year writing this plot and writing the music, and it was this wonderful experience. And it kind of gave me the confidence later on when I figured out I wanted to write to actually be like, maybe I can write an opera, I can write a book. I spent a few years after college, first waitressing, because what do you do with a liberal arts degree? There's not a lot, but or anything you want. I don't know how you want to look at it, but for me, it was waitressing. And then I started working with arts organizations because music and theater was my love, as well as books. And eventually ended up getting this idea after working in the Boston in Boston and taking the subway all the time for this book about fairies living in the old unused subway tunnels of Boston, of which there are many. And I just got this idea, and I was totally captivated by it. And I'm like, I'm going to try to write this. Maybe I can do it. And I started writing a little bit here, a little bit there, and I became completely obsessed and pretty much have never looked back. That book did not sell, nor did like the 6 after. But it was a lot of fun and a lot of practice novels before it finally get published.
Do you think that would be something that you would ever go back to as a story? I know
absolutely.
Sometimes, yeah, because I've talked to a lot of people on here, and sometimes they say like, oh, completely, I've been working on something, or it's, I will never touch that again. It is done for. And I know everyone's different about that.
Some of the 6 novels I will never touch again. And that's fine. They were purely practice, and it was good to have the practice, but don't need to revisit. But there's 2 that I will absolutely intend to. Well, we'll see if they ever sell. But hopefully we'll be able to have time to like finish, revamp them. Because they need obviously a lot of revision. And one of them is that first book about fairies in the subway tunnels. Because I love that story and the characters, and it was so much fun. And so someday I feel like I'm a better writer now. So I should be able to, make it work and figure out what I did wrong with the plot. Because I know a lot of it was like plot issues, because like I know what a plot is. And back then I knew what a plot was because I'd seen lots of movies. I'd read tons and tons of books. So like, you know a plot when you see it, but actually creating a plot is a very different thing. And I did not understand, like, you can't just like go off and write tangents because they're fun. It's great for practice, absolutely. But for a coherent plot, not as much.
It's like,
So,
I've seen writers before say like, well, you don't need a plot if you've got good characters. And I'm like, I agree with that to a point, but you need to know how to write a plot in order to let the characters move it along. Like,
exactly. The characters can absolutely drive the plot, but they need to be going somewhere. Like, they need to be changed. And if they're just doing random stuff, maybe some people can make that work. Like, I'll certainly never say never, but this is minority. For sure. It certainly wasn't right for me. That's for sure. So I need to go back and replot that. I had this like long, like 10-page meandering plot line of all sorts of random fun things, like doing things, random fun magical things in Boston. But it did not really hold water in a coherent way. So, and the other one is the last young adult book that I queried agents with right before my first book got an agent. My first book was Monstrous. So basically a Frankenstein meets the Brothers Grimm from the viewpoint of the monster as a 13-year-old girl, which was super fun to write. But before that was this YA sci-fi cyborg road trip novel about this girl who finds out she's a cyborg on prom night and accidentally kidnaps her next door neighbor, and they go cross country to find her maker. And it was so fun. And when I created agents, I got all these requests, and I had agents tell me it was the best query letter they ever read. And then I kept getting rejections that were not consistent. And they all, like, one person said she thought the pacing was too fast. So I thought the pacing was too slow. Somebody else thought the pacing was just right, but didn't like how the romance panned out. So it was feedback that was like, I didn't know what to do. Like, something's clearly wrong with the book, but I don't know what it is. So I eventually need to go back to that and figure it out, because I loved that book. It was a lot of fun.
That sounds incredible. I would totally read that book.
It was so much fun. Yeah.
Course of like your writing career and your journey as a writer, how do you think your writing style has changed and progressed? I mean, obviously what you were saying about your knowledge of like plot structure and stuff, but are there any other things?
Absolutely. So when I first started out writing, I was just using Word and like randomly writing notes in this like kind of like a word vomit document that like I'd kind of tried to like cobble into a plot, and I'd like put scenes in there and be like, well, this could go over here and this could go here. And like, it was very difficult to navigate and not coherent, as I mentioned either. And I also find Word really hard to write in because I tend to not write linearly. Even though my plots are usually, not always, but usually relatively linear. I like to write whatever interests me in the moment. And that way that's for me helps avoid writer's block, because I can just be like, well, if I'm not interested in this scene today, I can just come back to another day and write this other one that's like burning in my head right now. And I find it very helpful. I know a lot of writers who just simply cannot do that. It'll make them go batty. So, which is totally valid. It's not for everybody. It works really well for me though. So trying to write that in a Word document was like not great, to say the least. So what I ended up doing was this ridiculous thing of making individual Word documents for every single chapter so that I could just like write them when I wanted. So what I didn't realize at the time was I basically wanted Scrivener. If you've never heard Scrivener.
I've heard of it. I didn't know that's what it was. Like does it separate?
It's basically, it's all these different like little scrivenings, which are basically like small text files, but it's all in one document, and you can move them around, and you can put in like, the different chapters, you can move them. It's so amazing. I call myself a Scrivener evangelist. I won't take over the podcast by talking about it, but they don't pay me. I just happen to love it. It like truly changed my writing life because it was like when I finally I'd heard people talking about it, and I was like, oh, it's money. I don't want to spend it. But then NaNoWriMo, and also I didn't have a Mac at the time too, and now they have it for Windows. And during NaNoWriMo in like 2010, which totally dates me, they were doing like a 50% off if you win, they had the beta of the Windows was then, and then you can get 50% off later on or something. And so I was like, sweet, I want to try the beta version. And I was like, oh my God, it was like angels singing. Like, this is what I've been looking for. This is what my brain has wanted all this time. And I have to write Scrivener. It's like the best thing. I can do like, copy edits and stuff like that in Word documents, and that's fine. But for the actual drafting, like Scrivener, that is how my brain works. Yeah.
Oh my God, that sounds incredible. I use Google Docs and I just do the outline feature so I can go to things and then just copy and paste like chunks of text, and it's always chaotic and messy. And I think I also need Scrivener now.
Yeah, Scrivener is like it makes your chaos useful. It's like it's organized chaos is what it is.
That
it's
sounds
great.
amazing.
And you can customize it to like how you want, how your brain works too. Like I have like, I used to teach classes on it and stuff. Like I can send you my course packet and my like walkthrough packet if you want. I'm not kidding. I love talking people with Scrivener and help people with Scrivener. And the other thing that I've used that was really helpful for me is Blake Snyder's Save the Cat beat sheets. That changed my plotting life. Now I can write a plot that's actually coherent and holds water, and is not missing important things. I have an Excel spreadsheet version. There's a whole bunch of different like templates running around, but it's basically like the 15 story beats for script writing initially. They now actually have a book that recently came out for novels specifically. I haven't read it, but I've heard good things about it. But the beats are essentially the same, and it's so helpful. And even if you aren't a plotter, if you're a pantser, if you need help like going back after you've written the draft and seeing where you have plot holes, going back and like plugging in where you're hitting the mark on all of those beats can be really useful to see like kind of like reverse engineer, where you need more help. And that was life changing as well. And then I can plug my outline into Scrivener, because Scrivener has 3 views. It has like the scrivenings, that like kind of like Word doc-esque thing, note cards you can move around, and then an outline. I don't use the note cards personally because that's just not how my brain is wired, but a lot of people find them very useful. But the outline of like the Word document part, I love that. I love it.
That is so cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course. I could share a lot more, but I'm not going to. I'm restraining myself here.
Yeah. Well, actually, you mentioned NaNoWriMo. Were any of the books that you have published written for NaNoWriMo, or would you mind telling me a little bit about how that was for you?
Yeah, so I love NaNoWriMo. It's so much fun. It's, for some reason, my brain is wired weird. Like drafting is usually really difficult for me. It's like the worst part of the process, even though like it's fun because it's the fresh words on the page and the ideas getting out of your brain. Sometimes, and a lot of the time, too often, it's like pulling taffy out of my brain is what it feels like. Like it's just like, why can't this write itself and just like download from my brain onto the page, which unfortunately is not actually possible yet. But for some reason, the NaNoWriMo, like the element of like competition, even though there's not really an element of competition, is just in my head where I'm like, my writer friends, where are they? How many words have they written today? Like, I can do better.
There's totally an element of competition. And on the website too, and it like clocks you and it's like, this is what percent you're through and everything. Yeah. I found myself competing with myself when I was doing
absolutely. It. Absolutely. For some reason, it kicks my brain into gear where I'm like, okay, I'm going to write 5,000 words today. And and I can do it if I have the time and space. And that's the caveat. Like, since I had kids, I only won it twice because I had to take like a couple of years off. And this past year I had to, because I had just had a baby. So that didn't work, unfortunately. But like when I can, like I've gotten to the point where I can usually write like a 50K novel in like 15 days or less. I think like my fastest has been 10 days, which is absolutely insane and not normal for me at all. Usually it takes like 6 months to write a draft that long. And
that's amazing. For some reason,
NaNoWriMo is like, if I need those words in the page, like I'm going to do this. I'm just going to get it out. And it's obviously needs a ridiculous amount of editing afterwards, but at least it's like that those words on the page and something to work with. And I've written a lot of my books have been, trying to think, a very high percentage, probably like maybe 70 to 75%, like at least 75% has probably been at least drafted at some point or partially drafted at some point in NaNoWriMo. Because sometimes if I'm like working on more than one project, I might do like half of the project, like 25K in one book and 25K in another, things like that. So like a pretty good percentage have been drafted in some way or shape or form for NaNoWriMo.
Wow, that's amazing. Every time I finish NaNoWriMo, at the end of it, I don't know what this is about my brain, but I get really bitter and I swear off ever doing NaNoWriMo again until the next November. And I'm like, all right, I'm going.
That's fair.
Back. I think just because the competition level, I get like so intense about it, and it's like the best resource though.
It is. It's fantastic. And it's just fun to like, and it's like you have that time, like, okay, a couple of weeks. I can tell my husband, like, just need to like leave me alone for a couple of weeks and let me do that. So I'm gonna do it really quick. I promise. It'll be great. Be done before Thanksgiving. Be fine.
So kind of pivoting, but what was it like working with a co-author on your book, The Star Shepherd?
It was fun. And actually, I've now worked with 2 co-authors, but we haven't announced the project yet for the second one. So I have 2 different experiences, oddly enough. So with The Star Shepherd, that was with Dan Herring, who's awesome. He's an artist, illustrator, and out in Utah. And he's worked on a whole bunch of cool projects like Tangled and all sorts of fun things. He's super talented. And this was actually a project that came across my desk as kind of like, almost like a work for hire, because he had already made a short film of The Star Shepherd a few years before. And that was actually how he ended up getting his agent, was she had seen the film, was like, you should make this a book. And they kind of like played around the idea for a while and ended up deciding, well, why don't we bring in another writer to like work on the words with you, and you can do the artwork and all of that. And his agent happened to be at my agency. So they have these like, regular meetings, and his agent was like, looking for someone who writes kind of weird, dark middle grade. And my agent's all like, I have an idea. And so they sent me the pitch for the project and the synopsis and the short film. And I was like, oh my God, I have to write this. How do I get out of this project? Because I have had a lifelong obsession with stars. And it's my star shirt. It's one of my favorite things. When I was in high school, my friends used to call me Star Girl because I wore little sticker stars in my teeth every day.
I just got star earrings delivered to my house.
Did you really? I love it.
I'm so excited. Awesome. I feel you on all the star obsession for sure.
Absolutely. So it was like another star obsessed person who wants to write a book. This is amazing. And the short film was just absolutely exquisite. We ended up making a book trailer out of it. It shortened it a lot, but just so fantastic. So we ended up deciding to work together, and because we kind of like knew each other a little bit online because we're clients of the same agency. So we'd like talked once or twice before, and he knew my work already too. So that made it easier. That we're also like, it was like a cold introduction, basically, which is good. So what we ended up doing, because we live across the country, because I'm out on the East Coast and he was in Utah, is, we had like one meeting over the phone or Zoom or something. And then I would go to work drafting the book. And if I had questions about his synopsis, because this is a very detailed synopsis, like 20 pages or something. So it was very detailed. And some of it had like these beautiful descriptions that were just verbatim put in the book because they are fantastic. And, I'd send him the draft, and if I had questions on like, so what did you have in mind for this? Because a lot of times with stories, even in synopses, a lot of it still lives in your head. It may not be on the page. So if I had questions about things, I'll make sure like, what did you envision for this? What was your thoughts? And sometimes he'd like, oh yeah, do this, this, and this. Other times he'd like, I hadn't thought of anything yet. I'm like, great, I'm going to run with this instead. And we kind of go back and forth about that. And he'd read the book and the chapters rather, and give me feedback. So we kind of worked on it collaboratively in that sense. And meanwhile, he'd be doing these wonderful illustrations. And there's almost 20 or so illustrations throughout the book. And he also designed the cover, which was really cool to see, the genesis of all the artwork, including the cover from like the very beginning. Because as an author, you don't usually get to see that, especially with the cover. It's like almost secretive sometimes. Like you'll see you might see a draft to the artwork ahead of time, and then you see the final version. But there's usually like so many other iterations that it goes through before it gets to that like semi-final version. And I got to see like all of them, which was really cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's really neat. But I got to get feedback on what I liked and didn't. And that was really cool to have that like inside track on that. And so it was such a fun book to write. And Dan is great to work with. And maybe we'll work again together some other time in the future. Who knows? Went on tour together for the book, which was really cool. It was a really great experience. It was a lot of fun. My other collaboration, can't give too many details what the book is about yet, but it's a middle grade sort of sci-fi-ish X-Files inspired book. And
that's X-Files. That's awesome.
I can't wait till we can announce it. Can't yet, but but anyway, so we're with this co-author who's lovely, and this is a very different experience because she pitched me the idea because it was around the time that they had that X-Files revival, and so she pitched me the idea of, hey, let's want to work on this book, and I was like, oh, this sounds really fun, and I got to write somebody who was like crazy alien obsessed, like I was when I was a tween. I was nuts about aliens. Still kind of am, actually, to be honest.
Stars. It's bringing it back.
It is. There's a theme. So that's been really fun because we got to like plot the whole book together and write different points of view, and it's been it's a very different experience, but it's been a lot of fun as well. So yeah, it's been interesting to write with a co-author. So in some ways, it's like less work because you're writing half the book, but it still is a lot of work, obviously, like any book is a lot of work. But it's a lot of fun more than that because you get someone to like bounce ideas off of and like share a brain, which is nice. So
oh, that is all so cool. For that kind of going back to the first one, Star Shepherd, what was it like writing it while having the art? Like did that and having the short film look back on like for character descriptions and things like that?
That really provided so much inspiration. It was so cool to have that because he was doing the artwork while I was writing the book. So getting to see that and where he was going with like the design and all of that was just like the mood and the feel. It very much inspired that. Absolutely, it was really cool it was really cool to experience that.
That is so cool. Well, oh my gosh. Now I'm really excited about this X-Files collaboration. Me
too.
So kind of going back to earlier when you were telling me about the opera you wrote, I saw on your website that it was a Hamlet opera. Can you share more about this? Because it sounds amazing. And I got so excited about it when I was researching.
Yes. So it was a sequel to Hamlet, which I know sounds really weird since like literally everybody dies. So I think like now his name's fallen on my brain, but there's one dude left standing and that's like it. So in my opera, it was a sequel to Hamlet, basically Hamlet's journey through the underworld. And it was called The Undiscovered Country. And the subtitle was called Quilting with Shakespeare, because what I did was I wrote the plot and I figured out what I wanted to have happen and how Hamlet would go through the underworld and had to like confront the people he like wronged and like make amends. But I didn't feel confident writing the words. I don't know why, but I didn't. And it hadn't really occurred to me yet that I could write the words, but I was like, I've been, focusing on writing music. So what I ended up doing to create the libretto, that's the words for an opera, was I went through all of Shakespeare's plays, and after I'd written this plot, and pulled out all these bits and pieces and phrases and like excerpts that I thought could potentially work within the plot, and pulled it out of context, and then kind of Frankenstein them back together according to my plot.
Uh-huh.
So all the words were Shakespeare's, but you'd have like a little piece of Othello next to a little piece of Romeo and Juliet, and like
I love this so much.
So it was a little nuts, but it was a lot of fun. And and I had this like crazy citation thing, like citing like where every single one came from. I think I like told my like advisors I would track this or something. So I had two advisors, one on the music side and one on the like literature department. Mm-hmm. And like got to meet with them regularly and all of that. So I had a libretto, and then I wrote the music and had this like year-long experience of like, I think I took like a couple classes in the fall, maybe one in the spring, but most of my time was spent working on this opera. And it was this glorious experience writing this music and having so much fun with it. And then later I tried to put it on and only 2 people showed up for the audition. So sadly, that never got off the ground.
Oh, it's so cool. Oh, wow.
I thought so. Amazing, yeah. But, maybe someday, if I become super famous writing, I mean, knock on wood, they'll posthumously decide to like perform my opera just for fun.
I can't get over how cool that is that you incorporated the Shakespeare like that. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. Thank you very much. It was all because I didn't have the confidence to write words. I don't know why.
I mean, that can yield some of the most interesting results.
It was a lot of fun, and it worked too, which is kind of the crazy thing.
So worked. Cool. kind of on that note, now in your writing, how do you incorporate fairy tales? Because I know that you don't usually have to be a rigid retelling, but like you kind of have elements of Frankenstein and Brothers Grimm and stuff like that.
Yeah, a lot of it is more like thematic and mood and atmosphere to it, and like motifs of things. So like, for example, in Monstrous, like my first novel was like Frankenstein meets the Brothers Grimm. Definitely not a retelling by any means, but pulling in thematically things like there's this whole running theme about roses, and which you see a lot in fairy tales, and about the monster, but it was kind of turning it on its head. Whereas there's a monster and people have to defeat the monster, but the main character is the monster. And my second book, Ravenous, that was a companion to the Monstrous, and that was a spin on Hansel and Gretel and the Russian folktale of Baba Yaga, which was fun. There's a big chicken house on the back of the cover, which I was so excited about.
Cool.
I love this chicken footed house. It's amazing. And that was really fun because that's not a straight retelling of Hansel and Gretel either. But there's this main character, Greta, who's searching for her brother Hans. And there's this ravenous witch who wants to eat them, or is going to eat him if she doesn't give her a special item that she needs. So that is sort of that, like, there's these tasks they have to, fulfill, magical items, things like that you kind of see in fairy tales, to kind of incorporate them and weave them in, but try to make them my own more than anything. But mostly inspired in particular by the Grimm fairy tales, not the Disneyfied ones usually, though those are great too. Nothing against those at all. But for when I'm writing my sort of like weird dark little books, I tend to be more toward the grimmer aspects, which means they can get a little dark, and they can get a little dark, but that's okay. And so you'll say, I heard somebody say once, shortly after Monsters came out, that like you can't kill anybody in middle grade, and there's like a dozen deaths in that book. Some people die twice, so there's at least 2 people who die twice in that book.
Yeah, like, when I was that age, though, that's the kind of book that I would have read. And so I think that it's so good to have books like that, because a lot of times kids can handle more than people think they can. Absolutely. And I know that my friends and I were like desperate for books like that had darker elements. And I would always read the original Brothers Grimm stories and things like that, because it's where interesting things happen, Yeah.
And they get really dark, those stories. They're nuts, but it's great. It's interesting. But yeah, and the great thing about the books is that, if a child decides it is too dark for them, they can close the book. They don't have to keep reading. It's not like it's a real life thing, but it can also really help kids and older people as well, process darker things, and I think that's really important. I know when I was growing up, that was something I needed, and that was really important to me to process those things and those emotions, and in a safe way. So I thought that was really important. But generally speaking, a lot of my books do incorporate some kind of fairy tale elements, in some way, shape, or form, and if not in like directly, in like a mood or atmosphere. I think Monstrous and Ravenous, they definitely had like ties in some more specific ways to the fairy tales, whereas other ones like Shadow Weaver and the Holiday series is not directly a fairy tale, but it has sort of a fairy tale feel to it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That is so cool. I've had a really great time talking with you today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. It's been a great time.
Yeah, this was lots of fun. My last question for you is, what do you have coming up?
That I can talk about, my next book is called A Breath of Mischief. It'll be out from Source Books in 2023. I want to say it's early April. I'm not quite sure the exact date. That may change because publishing is weird. You never know. but it's supposed to be spring 2023 right now. Hoping to do a cover reveal in the next week or two. So very excited for that.
Exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you. The book is about a girl whose name is Aria, and she was raised by the wind. And one day, all the wind in the realm disappears, and she has to find what happened to her missing parents and save them. And it was so much fun to write. And I've always wanted to name a character Aria as well. It's a little insider opera joke for myself. So I just love the name. And I'm really excited about that. So, and hopefully I can talk more about my other project in the near future.
That is also exciting.
Definitely more books on the horizon. So.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, everyone listening to this, go check out all of these amazing sounding books. I know I will be for Read Between the Lines. My name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Marcykate Connolly.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after.
The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.